class from start to finish. So essentially, we're now giving you a shortened highlight version of our top Creative Live classes. You can always dive into the full class with 5, 10, or 15 hours of great content. But now, if you're just looking to focus on a few of the highlights or want to be able to skip quickly to something that really interests you, you can now get a shortened, fast class version of that class. We're also thinking this might be able to help you explore a new craft and save time while doing it. This is a great tool to curate your learning experience to help create the life that you seek. So you're probably thinking, great, how do I access this new experience on Creative Live? That's easy. All you have to do is be a subscriber to the Creator Pass, and then all this is yours. If you're feeling isolated and looking for creative connection, try tuning into creativelive.com/TV. That's where we've got a 24/7 live stream from the kitchen counters.
I can do that backlit shot that I really like to do.
From the studios and living rooms of many of the world's top creators, where we're doing musical performances, Q&As, cooking shows, virtual book tour events, drawing, spoken word poetry, and more.
Life passed me by waiting for an invitation when the world is greater than my nation or my occupation. Be someone you've never been. You feel all that adrenaline? It's medicine.
It actually helps me feel like my days are more purposeful.
I hope that out of this deep pain will come some collective growth.
Dive into Creative Live TV today. Hey everybody, what's up? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the planet. I'm Chase, your friend, your host, your guide, and the founder and CEO of Creative Live, here about to drop into the next episode of Chase Jarvis Live here on Creative Live. If you're new to the show, this is where I sit down with the world's top creators and entrepreneurs and do everything I can to bring you what's in their brain with the hope of helping you live your best life. And today we are going to go deep with someone who I've long respected and admired. We've been in the same circle for about 15 plus years. He is a climber, a photographer, and a filmmaker, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker of the film Free Solo, which you certainly have seen. It's no surprise that we're talking about Mr. Jimmy Chin. He's also a National Geographic photographer and a well-known mountain sports athlete known for his ability to capture extraordinary imagery while climbing, skiing in the highest risk environments in the world. He began his professional career pre-2000, and his talents were quickly recognized by the top folks in the world. I remember very early on in my photographic journey seeing some of the climbing photographs that Jimmy had started to shoot, and been so impressed. We've been in the same circles for years, lots of mutual friends, and so that's going to allow us to go extra deep today. And if you're tuning in right now from Facebook or YouTube, might be a good chance to head over to creativelive.com/TV, where I'm looking at a live feed of comments coming in from all over the world. You can click the join live chat right there, and I will see your comments and questions, and will do everything I can to work them into my conversation with Jimmy. But without further ado, the man that you are here to see, Mr. Jimmy Chin in the house. Jimmy, welcome to the show, bud.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Where are you coming in live from today, my man?
I'm coming in live from my home in Jackson, Wyoming. Yeah.
And before I confess, before we were live, you were commenting about you just got to ski a big line yesterday. Is that right? Can you give us the what line you skied and or what it's like to be skiing right now in COVID when most people are locked in small apartments around the world?
Yeah. I mean, we've been throughout this whole kind of quarantine, we've been doing, getting out, being in the backcountry, but obviously keeping it really mellow because we didn't want to stress the already stressed healthcare system. So, but just pretty much in my backyard.
He's just pointing at it. It's like, it's right there.
Not in the park, but south of the park, and skiing up around some of the southern Tetons. It's been very grateful that, we're in a place where we have an opportunity to kind of stay outside and be outside and get some fresh air and exercise. And I think, as they say in Wyoming, residents of Wyoming have been social distancing since the inception of the state.
Well said. Yeah. For so many people who are, again, locked in small apartments all around the world, we've got folks coming in from London, from South Africa. I see in Australia. I see in Oslo, Copenhagen.
Wow.
Yeah, so that we have people joining in from all over the world is not an overstatement. And I'm sure a lot of those folks are locked in small apartments somewhere. So thank you for living your best life in Wyoming, and we'll live vicariously through you. I also have a chance to be outside here. I'm on the Puget Sound. I'm going to go for a paddle here shortly. One of the few opportunities to be outside in a place for me. I've been in the family for about 100 years. This little chunk of property. I'm trying to do the same thing, work when I can, and remotely. But your work is entirely different than most people's work because your work is basically remote by nature, and yet integrating a lot of equipment, a lot of other people, making films and whatnot. But before we get into more about what you're doing right now, I want to go back for those folks who are new to your world. I'm guessing they'd have to be living under a rock because damn near everybody I know on the whole planet has seen Free Solo. But most people don't know your backstory from in the world that we're talking to. Mostly creators and entrepreneurs tuning in today, so familiar with the profession that you set out at, but not the climbing part. They understand the photography and the filmmaking. So I'm looking to build a little bit of a narrative arc. Let's go back to early days. How did you find this sort of the passion that you have right now for being outside, and how did you combine that with filmmaking to make not just a life but a living as well?
Yeah, well, kind of ironically, I grew up in the Midwest in a small town called Mankato, Minnesota, in south central Minnesota, which is basically one of the flattest places in the United States. It's certainly not a hotbed of climbers or high altitude alpinists or really photographers or filmmakers. But I think, my parents were from China, Chinese immigrants, and they were librarians at the university there. And I guess, I've been asked this a bit, but I really think it's because I was fed a ton of books growing up. I had an older sister who read voraciously, so I was always, and she was 6 years older than me, so I was always kind of picking up the books that she had been reading and was reading pretty advanced levels at a young age. And I think that really kind of expanded my imagination. And I grew up doing a lot of different activities, sports. I started playing the violin when I was 3.5 and swam competitively and studied the martial arts. and was pretty competitive. My parents really stressed excellence, and kind of traditional Chinese parents were like all about academics and getting into the right schools and stuff. And so I had that kind of like pounded into me, kind of that ethos of hard work and trying really hard and being in kind of competitive sports. But they weren't really my things, they were kind of imposed on me. And while like I've been more and more appreciative as I've grown older for like what those activities gave me, when I was younger, I was like, I want to go. All I wanted to do was play outside, and I found skiing pretty early on, and that became my thing. So I only got to do it if I was, doing well in school and everything else, and it actually motivated me to do really well so that I could ski as much as possible on this teeny hill behind my house. And I guess for so long, I just wanted to like escape my little hometown in the Midwest and explore the world. And I found climbing when I was in college. And between climbing and skiing, all I wanted to do was be in the mountains. And that's kind of the path that I chose. Was I finished school and I moved to Yosemite and just went for it. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I love. And that was actually a really, really hard choice for me because, I had a lot of pressure, certainly from my parents and my family, but I think also in society, you're supposed to finish school and then you're supposed to get your internship or get your first job and start your career path. And I was, living in the back of my car or in a cave behind Camp 4, really questioning if that was the right decision, but that's the path that I chose. And
Well, at what point? So, it sounds like you ran to climbing rather than ran to photography. And so, at what point did you start to put those two things together? Because I definitely want to circle back. I have written extensively about this, and I think you and I have a shared value around understanding what society wants for you, and then there's the things that you actually have to do, that you were put on this planet, and finding out about it. I want to go back to that, but before, like, you just talked about climbing, and where did the art part of your living and life come into the picture?
I mean, it followed pretty quickly after I started spending time in Yosemite. Maybe within that year that I moved there, maybe 2 years after I kind of really committed to climbing, I picked up a camera from a good friend of mine who was still a very close friend of mine, Brady Robinson. He's now the executive director at the Conservation Alliance. But, he showed me how to use his camera, and it was like a manual. He sent it to me.
Grab it. Can you see it?
Yeah, it's right here.
Nice.
Check out the analog right here.
Yes.
An old Nikon.
Is it an F2 or an
FE3.
FE3. There you go.
But he showed me how to use it, and I took a photo with it one morning, and he was trying to sell his photos. We were shooting on slides, and a company bought one photo from him, and it was the photo that I took. And they paid $500 for this photo, which, when you're living out of your car, and I was actually teaching at Knowles at the time, as well, and odd jobs, waiting tables. I was doing whatever I could to kind of feed the passion. But I took that money and I bought a camera. And I just remember thinking that was like an outrageous amount of money for a photo. I was like, they paid that much money for photo. And of course, like I joke about this, but at the time I was like, wow, I only need to take one photo a month and I'll be able to live like this for the rest of my life. And I'm like living the dream.
It's amazing that you share that story. I sold my photo for $500, but it was $500 and a pair of Heart skis. You remember those skis?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think also a Minnesota company, I think.
Yeah.
500, and I had the same exact thought, like, wait a minute. So $500, all I have to do is just do that again, and then I can just live here. And I was living in Steamboat at the time, and I could just live here and do that over and over again. This is a good life.
Yeah.
And so clearly that's changed for you. So if that was the first break, if you will, presumably others came. But did you feel like, let's go back to that thing that I said we were going to go back to earlier, this idea of, you were raised in a family where expectations were high, that you were going to perform and check a lot of the culturally accepted boxes. And I think for so many people watching, just as a reminder, now we've got people tuned in also from Monica, from Dubai. I know we got a fellow Minnesotan in the house, India, Washington, D.C., lots of folks. But I'm guessing a lot of those people have been told stories from their parents and career counselors and mentors and friends and spouses about what they ought to be and become, either when they grow up or that they better get their act together. And my assumption is that coming from a family where high performance was well regarded and academics were stressed, that this put some stress on the relationship with your parents and the relationship, we'll just say, with the world. So since so many people have the same problem, this challenge, how did you deal with it? And was it easy, hard? Just give us a little bit of a blow by blow.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I think of like my story, and especially in the beginning, like that choice in my early 20s to follow my heart and my passion was certainly the most pivotal decision I ever made in my life, hands down. And those kinds of decisions are never easy. I think that there was or is sometimes a misperception that I always knew what I wanted to do and it was really clear and I just did it, and it kind of all fell into place, which to a degree is true. But the thing that I think is misunderstood is that choice was filled with so much doubt, and it wasn't like feeling doubt and dread for a couple months. It was like years of doubt, and also feeling really guilty in a way, like I'd let down my parents, and that, because I did have a lot of friends that did follow a fairly traditional career path, have done really well, are very happy, but it wasn't, it didn't fit for me. And so whenever you feel like, oh, I'm not fitting in, that's hard, and people often ask me, what's the greatest risk you've ever taken? And, I think the assumption is like climbing this mountain or skiing that mountain, but easily it was kind of taking the leap and moving to, Yosemite and living in a car, which, my parents' viewpoint was like the ultimate failure, in the sense, like because I would call my sister and check in with her and be like, well, how are mom and dad doing? Kind of getting the lowdown from my sister, who, by the way, went to Stanford, went to Oxford, was at Yale. I mean, she checked a lot of the for me. She's brilliant. And she was always super encouraging. She was like, you know what, you gotta do what you're doing right now. It's the right thing. But she'd say, and I'd be like, oh, how's mom doing? And she'd say, well, mom keeps saying under her breath that she's raised a homeless man. And that was kind of like their perspective, you know. They were like, he got lost along the way. We did everything we could for him. And I think it was really hard on my parents, which made it hard on me. And I can imagine now, like, if my kids, you know, like, I would call my parents and be like, well, I'm leaving for Pakistan and I'm climbing high altitude walls for the next 3 months. And that, you know, we didn't have a sat phone or anything. And so it was like, I'll send a postcard when I get to Islamabad, and, you know, I'll see you in 3 months, you know. I mean, it would be hard, I think, for any parent.
For sure. Well, let's less about your parents and more about you. What was what was your headspace? Did you feel undeniably you were doing the right thing? You talked about it as the hardest thing you've ever done. Did you and you talked about doubt. Did you ever think about throwing in the towel, or once you started on this path?
Yeah, I did think I was going to throw in the towel, because originally I had said, hey, I'm going to do this for a year, climb and ski full time, and then I'm going to follow a career path. And after that year, I actually went to San Francisco, was couch surfing at a friend's place, trying to do interviews, and I did a bunch of interviews. And for, you know, like environmental NGOs, I'd studied international relations, and a big part of it was on international law and environmental studies. So I was kind of toying with this idea of doing, and I did a bunch of interviews, and then actually a friend of mine from Mammoth called me and was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I have interviews. I have an interview tomorrow. He's like, you got to come out to Mammoth now. There's storms lined up from beach about to hit the California coast. What are you doing? You're an idiot. And I was like, no, I can't go to Mammoth. And then the next day I packed up my car and drove to Mammoth. And then I never looked back. And it was like the winter of 97 or something. I mean, it was 395 had closed down, and it just nuked. It was an El Nino year. It just nuked all day, every day for like 3 months straight or 4 months straight. And I just skied POW and lived in my friend was caretaking a house, and there was a boiler room in the basement, and I was sleeping on a sleeping pad in a boiler room in his basement and just skiing every day. But yeah, no, I still struggled. But the joy I was feeling,
yeah,
and I mean, it was such a deep, profound experience that I still seek and live for every day, and it's that feeling of being in the mountains, and that self-reliance, and that exploration and adventure, and the friendships, you know.
Was that, yeah, ultimately, how did you reconcile this with your parents? Because again, I think doing the thing that you're compelled to do is, you know, we can understand why we would do that, and yet there's still this moment where most people that I know who have taken a non-traditional path, if it's not a moment, then it's a lifetime of small moments of reconciling with the people who, when you struck out on your own, didn't understand.
Yeah.
And I remember for me, my parents, finally when it was like, oh, yeah, do you want to, where I was able to fly them around, like, oh, you want to come, we're wrapping up in Switzerland. Do you want to come join us at the end of the shoot? When they start to understand that, okay, because you tell them $500 in a pair of skis and they think it's cute. Yeah. And presumably it's it's, oh, neat, that's great. But presumably at some point,
yeah,
you have to have a conversation with them. And was this one moment, or was it 1,000 tiny moments? Because the people who are listening, again, from all over the world right now, most of these people haven't yet had the conversations with the people in their lives that they love.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for you to help us understand this a little bit.
Yeah, no, I would say it was really hard enough for a couple years where my communication with them really dropped off, like probably 2 years. And but I was also really focused. In some ways, it was really meaningful and motivating because I was like, I had a lot to prove all of a sudden too.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes that's healthy, sometimes that's not healthy. I don't really see a therapist, so I don't know, but that's part of the struggle, where you're also questioning, okay, well, what are my motivations and where are they coming from and what are my intentions? I mean, those are really important questions to ask yourself all the time, right? And those are the questions I was asking myself, a lot of existential questions. What is my purpose on this planet? Those kind of things. But I found the relief in the act of climbing and in the act of being in the mountains and then in the act of shooting and photographing and starting to tell stories. And I got really, really focused on, doing things every single day that I felt like were like moving me forward in some way, towards kind of an not totally clear goal, but it was about bettering myself all the time in everything that I did. And I did understand that, like, I wanted to be the best version of myself in everything that I was doing. And so that kept me really motivated. And so I started publishing pretty early on. And I think that, when my parents started seeing I was publishing, that was one thing. They didn't love the idea that I was going on these like massive expeditions to very remote places that seemed, they used to say to me, like, well, of course, we're really, really worried because there's not even a word in Chinese for what you do. Like, we have a 5,000-year-old written history and there isn't even a word for what you do in Chinese. So
we need something to tell our friends.
Yeah, well, and also, like, you have to, like, give us a break here, because it's just like so far out of our realm of reality. And that I took that into account. But when I started publishing, and then I think ultimately when there was in 2002 or 2003, when I got published in National Geographic, and we were at the headquarters, and there was the whole lobby was dedicated to this expedition I'd done with Conrad Anker, Rick Ridgway, and Galen Rowell to Tibet. And we were giving a talk at the Grosvenor Auditorium, and I remember walking in with the lobby with my mom and her looking around, and I think that was a big moment. That was a big moment. And then I gave a talk to a packed auditorium with Conrad and Rick, and then we all went out for dinner afterwards, and I think that was a moment.
Is it fair to say then that you just had to cultivate what would be traditionally seen as success in order to get the haters or the people who were unsure or unclear? And I'm expanding it beyond your parents here, because I'm sure your parents aren't haters, but external validation, is that one of the things that you felt helped tip that, and so folks would stop asking questions?
I mean, that was never the focus of like getting that external validation outside of like, in some ways I'd kind of written off my parents for a while. You're in your early 20s. That's what you do.
Who doesn't write off their parents in their early 20s, right?
Like, they have no clue what's going on, and I am just going to do this thing. And it was that total commitment, and I'm sure you've heard this many times from the people you've had on your show and friends, but I was committed completely to the craft of each of the things that I was doing, whether that was climbing. A big part of it was also just like putting together expeditions, that's a craft. You know, you have to have like a vision, you have to have an idea, you have to be like hugely motivated to go do something that doesn't really pay you any money. And I mean, some of it's for the glory, but some of it's really just about being like really inspired when you see some mountain that is in this remote range and it's never been climbed, and you see a beautiful line on it. And I don't know why, but that can be like hugely motivating. And so there was that kind of just deep commitment into doing what I was doing, and actually not looking for external validation. And climbing is kind of an interesting, especially when I, like in the late 90s, like there's an ethos around it. Everybody's trying to be understated, and you're just trying to be, you know, you're trying to push yourself and push it to the edge and see what you can achieve. And I was really surrounded by a lot of people like that in Yosemite, and that's why I always think of like the climbing tribe is still the closest community to my heart, because those are the people that I fell in with, and that, you know, just they're so motivated. And at the time, you know, climbing's become much more mainstream now, but like it was a lot of misfits and just like, but extraordinary people that I felt like just had like a lot of human spirit, and we're always kind of chasing the human potential. And that's kind of like very much a theme in the work that I've done.
I love this, the way that you articulated, focusing on the craft and keeping your head down and largely ignoring those voices, whether you're from your parents. And I think you attribute it to being in your 20s, but I think that's a great piece of takeaway for anyone who's listening, that you are going to have to ignore people, and often these people that are arguably some of the closest people that you have in the world, who don't understand your vision. But this idea of, and an ethos, I think is a great word, of allegiance to yourself and to your tribe of misfits that you've fallen in love with around whatever it is that you want to do. And it's to understand that culture doesn't largely welcome those folks, and whether it's external validation that ultimately helps them capitulate and start paying attention to you, or something else. I love that there's a focus on the thing rather than on the things that are a focus on the thing and the craft rather than on what would arguably be distractions. So if you're just now joining us, tuning in live from all over the world, I'm Chase, and I'm sitting here with my longtime friend, Jimmy Chin. Not only is he one of the top climbers in the world, but he's also an Oscar winner now with Free Solo. Man, huge. That rocked our community in the best way when you won that thing. And so for those watching, we are taking questions. I see questions coming in from the world. We'll ask a few of those in due time here. So if you have them, put them in the comments and I will see them and forward them to Jimmy. But I do want to shift gears, Jimmy. That was a great, sort of unpacking, if you will, of how you got from what I say 0 to 1, how you went from having a dream to living it. Now let's talk about going from 1 to 10. If 10 is winning an Oscar and 1 is just getting started, talk to us about 5, when you're at like points 4, 5, and 6 in the middle and you're just grinding, because I think that's a dark tunnel for a lot of people, and that's where a lot of people shift and give in, and we'll celebrate at the end here. We'll talk about the Oscar and the Oscar parties, but talk to us about the grind for a little bit and what it takes to achieve the success that you've created for yourself in filmmaking and climbing.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were talking about, really kind of shutting out the noise and staying really focused and committed to the craft. And for me, it wasn't just photography, it was also climbing and skiing and, like I was saying, like putting expeditions together. And, but, I think I would say the grind is like 10 years long, you know, from 26 to 36 or whatever. I mean, I'm still grinding these days. It's like a lot of work every day. And you got to love the grind. I mean, you got to embrace the grind, first of all. But it's interesting because I feel like expedition climbing, there were so many takeaways, and maybe, you know, it's a nature versus nurture thing. I don't know, but like maybe I was built to do that. But hard expeditions are hard. You have to
character and resilience and overcoming fear and stress and
optimism and the lessons I feel like I learned from doing expeditions were really applicable to the work and the career, because if you can think of, you know, as a climber, and you can take the parallels from this if you want, but especially a professional climber, you're looking to do things that nobody's ever done before. And oftentimes the objectives you're going for are seemingly impossible, and maybe a lot of people have tried them and failed, and you know, it's way off out here. And what you discover when you start doing a lot of expeditions is that occasionally, when everything lines up and you put your head down and you put one foot in front of the other, and you know, every obstacle you can imagine drops in front of you along your path towards this objective, and you just take it all in and you chip away at it. It's literally one step at a time. Occasionally you achieve it, and it's kind of unbelievable. And when that has been reinforced over time, and which it was for me, that like these impossible objectives were actually possible just through, you know, it's not a big secret. It's called hard work, you know, and being committed, but also being smart, knowing when to cut your losses, also to when to turn around. But you discover that you can achieve these kind of extraordinary things, not by doing one extraordinary thing, but by like doing a lot of little things to get there. And that's basically the mentality I took to my work as a photographer and as a filmmaker. I think you have to have that objective in mind, and it has to be there, and you have to be inspired by it, motivated by it. It can also become really overwhelming if that's all you're looking towards. So it's a balance of like staying focused on what's in front of you, the next 3 feet, and then occasionally checking in with yourself, like, is this still where I want to go? You know, because that's also important.
That's great. What role? So Molly Bond asks, I know you're close with Conrad, and he's scaled back some of his efforts recently or at some point, and I'm going to take it out of just like your relationship with Conrad and put it into the role of community. Like, what role did community play in your motivation, inspiration, and your growth and development?
The climbing community, or yeah, I'll just talk about the kind of the climbing community, and then there's all these concentric circles too, because then there's the photography community, there's the filmmaking community, there's writers that I've worked with. You know, there's a lot of different communities that start to overlap. What I really appreciated about my work that I'm the most grateful for have been the people that I've been able to work with and climb with and collaborate with. I think the most important part of being in these communities for me that was really pivotal were the people that kind of came out of those communities who kind of took me under their wing and recognized kind of my work ethic, and you know, really gave me big opportunities, which I took. I think it's important. Part of the conversation when it comes to mentorship, though, is that I always say that you don't necessarily find your mentors, they find you. And that's become much more clear to me now, because being a mentor is a huge investment. And you want to invest in people that you feel like are committed and have paid their dues in a certain way, and have showed kind of their commitment to what they're doing, and their love and passion for it, and that their intentions are all in the right place. But those are really important things. But the community for me has played a huge role in my career, for sure. Not to jump ahead, but I do know that the overwhelming feeling I had at the Oscars, and I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because it is what it is. But like, it's like my life flashed in front of my eyes, and it was all of the people that helped me along the way to get me there, because you don't get to a place like that by yourself. Like, I've had so many incredible mentors and people in my life that have really, helped guide me or push me along, or that I aspired to, so I hope that is the question answered.
No, yeah. I think it's, I believe that the most misunderstood thing in culture is largely community. We're social animals, first of all. So whether we are introverts or extroverts, or we like spending, time alone, or we see ourselves as a solopreneur or whatever, like, you're not going to get there without, help from so many people, even if it's not clear where that help's coming from, or you mentioned mentorship, and I just think it's really helpful to hear from someone like yourself who has achieved it, and specifically through the lens of the Oscars, like, it's, best director, like the doc of the year. Like, these are things that are people perceive as this solo journey with a backpack walking into the woods, but I think you'd be the first to say that it's anything but. So to hear from your own mouth that at the Oscars, that was the thing you were reflecting on the most. Let me ask another follow-up question there. So how, what's some advice that you would give to people who, now that you've, laid bare this truth that you only get there on the shoulders of so many other people and peers and friends and mentors and collaborators, do you have some advice on how to show up?
I mean, it's hard. Sometimes I'm like, my advice seems really harsh. Usually.
No, this is what. But see, this is I'll make it harsh.
I've been thinking about this a lot, because just with social media and with where the world is at right now, and culturally, and maybe people have been saying this for generations, probably, but I've had a lot of conversations with up and coming filmmakers and photographers, and they all come from it with different views and intentions, but it's sometimes I feel like the people are thinking about it a little bit backwards. It's like they want to get to this point for recognition, or for more followers, or for more, like we talked about earlier, like more external validation, reasons of external validation, which is natural, I think, but I don't know if that's the right paradigm to follow, because of what we talked about earlier, because it has to be about the work. It's got to be about, it's not like you're doing it to get to here. It's you're doing it to be here, present now, and doing the thing that, like, is is inspiring to you, that you're obsessed with and motivated by, and that you're creating. Because only if you can do that are you truly ever going to be able to get to there. And so to maybe flip that around and think about it in that way, because and this actually leads back to mentorship, is that when I see people who are working in that way that I was just talking about, because a huge part of what I do in storytelling and in the filmmaking that I do is you're like really examining people's intentions, right? And what are their motivations? And that's important. And those are questions that you should ask yourself. And so I think that's why I had really incredible mentors, because I think that they saw that I was just obsessed with, this thing that I was doing and making and creating. And the last thing I was really thinking about was, trying to be famous, or we didn't have social media in the late 90s, but it was just what I was creating was like the most important thing, and the people I was with and how we were collaborating and making these things was like hugely, interesting and to me. And so that's a long way of saying, I don't know, find your passion.
No, but there's so much wisdom in there, because again, this external part that's the part that people see at the end of the journey. And again, we're social animals, so being patted on the back, it's not a surprise that people want to be patted on the back. It's just the way you get back pats. It's not actually from just showing up on the summit. It's, you know what I mean? If you took a helicopter to the summit, it's not about being at the summit, right? It's about the journey that it took you to get there, and the people and your peers and your community is sort of along for the ride in so many ways. So I think it's insane advice, and it's not said frequently enough. So thanks for being willing to say it. Now let's talk about some of that success, because clearly, you've seen a lot of it, especially recently. Do you have is there, I don't know, have you reconciled that yet? Has it sunk in? I know you got, you have the trophies on the shelf there, but,
yeah. I would say, well, it was, first of all, like releasing a film and then going into an Oscar campaign. I don't know if people really know, but it's insane. And I'm not even doing like a $200 million feature film press tour. Like I'm doing a small doc press tour, but you're in a whirlwind for a year, and you're traveling a lot, and you're doing a lot of events, and you're meeting a lot of people. And it took me a little bit to get my head wrapped around it, because you're doing all these events because you're trying to get people to watch your film or get people to vote for your film, which is kind of antithetical to like what we were just talking about. It's kind of like I'm out here on the road, publicizing the work and not doing the work, and trying to win something but not doing the work. But it was interesting because I just basically took the ethos of like doing work. Well, I was like, well, this is what I'm doing now, so I'm just going to do the best that I can on this part of the journey for what it is. And that's kind of what we locked into. We were like, okay, well, we're going to do what we do with our work to campaigning for the theatrical release and the Oscars. And so that is how I got through it. But, and this is probably easier to say if you've won an Oscar, but it really reinforced for me exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is that, like, because I made the decisions I made to do the things that I love, like those are still truly what at the heart of the matter are the most important things to me. My family my friends. Um, the simple act of walking up a mountain, paddling out in, in swell or in surf, skiing, like those things that were there for me in the beginning that inspired me. It's like it's that whole experience reinvigorated my motivation to the things that have been always true to me, because I realized like those are like the only real true things that I have. And so that's kind of how I've reconciled it. Occasionally, I definitely still think like, did
that really happen?
Win an Oscar? That's crazy. Like that is like the most absurd thought, and I'll pat myself on the back for a moment, but like I'll be like, wow, that was pretty cool. But in general, it's kind of like you're still the same person you were before you won the Oscar, and keeping your feet on the ground and doing these things is still like the greatest joy of my life and my kids,
You mentioned this a couple times. I want to focus on two things. You talk about motivation and what makes you do the things you do, and you mentioned family a bunch. I want to talk about two things. We'll talk about family first, and I'm going to shift gears to talk about something else. So, you co-directed the film with your wife, so there's family there, and I know you have a couple kids, and what role does the role of your family play in your outlook on life and your career, and how is it to work as closely? I share this with, I work very closely with my wife for 15 or 20 years, and we have a lot of mutual friends and who know that. I'm curious what your take is on working closely with Chai, who also incredibly visionary in her craft. So can you talk about the role of family, your kids, the way that you work closely with Chai, and how that's impacted your career?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's funny. I just have to throw this anecdote in there. People ask about what the hardest part about filming Free Solo was. And so when we started production on Free Solo, Chai was 6 months pregnant, and we had a 2-year-old daughter, Marina. And my son, James, was born a couple months into production. So we had a 2.5-year-old and a newborn on location in Yosemite during the production of Free Solo. It was insane. Like trying to do, like managing like our crew, the high angle team, doing a 15-hour day and coming back and like changing diapers and watching dailies and like juggling. But my kids grew up with Uncle Alex and my whole crew of burly climbing cinematographers, and I now look upon that time and love thinking about it. But it's all mixed up, right? Because Chai's like the mother of my children. She's my cohort in this film, and producer and director, and that can be really challenging, as I'm sure you have experienced, especially when you have two directors in the house. Like, who gets to decide what you're going to eat for breakfast? And it's like we're both very kind of like strong-minded and opinionated, and have our ideas of how things are supposed to be done. But we very, very quickly realized on our first collaboration on Meru that the two very different worlds colliding, which was me, climbing bum, dirtbag, ski bum, adventure photographer guy, and then very, very highly intelligent, sharp woman that's grown up in Manhattan and has never ever even thought about climbing. But also like an incredible filmmaker, and her story about her filmmaking career is actually probably worth doing a show on too, because her career is extraordinary. She made her first film when she was 22, first feature doc at 22, and because she was breezing through Princeton, she was so bored she decided to make a film her senior year, and she got accepted into Tribeca Film Festival, her first feature doc at 22, and then it won Best Documentary at Tribeca, when she's like 22 or 23. Pretty unheard of. I think still probably the youngest person to ever win a Best Feature Doc at Tribeca. Anyway, so we kind of came together, and it was that cross-pollination thing that happened, where a sensibility and a way of thinking meshed together with where I was coming from, and I think it birthed something that was different than either of us could have achieved on our own, and we recognize that, like, and that's the kind of work that we look for. We're like, what are the projects that are really interesting to me and really interesting to her? Like, if it doesn't interest both of us, we're kind of setting them aside. We're working on projects that like we both are like, whoa, I really love it for this reason, and she really loves it for this reason, and then we kind of mesh it together. But
well, it's inspiring and motivating, and reinforces the point about collaboration and community, whether that community is your wife or partner, or one of your other co-conspirators. It's really inspirational how you've connected this yin and yang, and I think that's it's a really common trait among people I've had on the show, and for creators. So again, so many people think of this as a solo journey, and to be able to join forces with people who are as or more talented than you, and as or more experienced, and in different areas, or areas where your strengths and weaknesses are well matched. I think it sounds like it's been a really key piece of your journey with mentors and with partners. And the other side, the less pretty side of a similar coin, I'll file it under motivation or focus or inspiration. You and I have both been caught in really bad avalanches. And for me, it was a huge turning point, because it made me change a lens that I had on this one precious life that we have. And I know yours was chronicled in lots of different places, but I haven't heard you talk about it specifically as a motivator or a deterrent, or what lens did that have on your you could file it all under just curveballs or things that are hard. Like, how did that help shape you as the person you are?
Yeah, well, I'm sure through your experience you had probably very similar experience. Like you said, it's a very heavy kind of check-in, right? A lot of the hard questions we avoid asking ourselves, or questions that you don't even think about asking yourselves, are answered in a way without you wanting them necessarily to be answered. Or like, I mean, I guess we're all searching for purpose and meaning in life, but it was a pretty significant, deep check-in and it was pretty profound. There was a moment probably within half an hour of it happening, and me like surviving it, being like, it's like we have these amorphous kind of priorities floating around. They're kind of shifting, sometimes they go here and sometimes they go here. And I kind of remember it being like watching a screen and seeing things just go, like slotting into all the places. And I was like, wow. Like family, friends, the importance of what you want to achieve in your life, and where you want to be and where you want to go, and how you want to feel, how you want to, the things you want to see and experience. It really made me check in about those things. And what I got out of it at the time was that I felt like in some ways it reinforced what I'd been doing, because it wasn't like I survived the avalanche and thought I should be doing something totally different. I should have become a lawyer and I'm going to go to law school. Or I should have become a doctor. And it's not like, in some ways it reinforced like, okay, you did pick the right path, even though, it took me several months to even think about going back in the mountains. But I did feel reinvigorated after I kind of got over the initial, PTSD or whatever. I was in shock for a little bit. But I did, and during that time, I was questioning what I was doing. I was like, well, is this the right thing? And I came out of it being like, yeah, this is the right thing. And actually, that was the spring before I went back to Meru the second time in 2011. And, obviously we climbed the shark's fin, and then I made the film that next year. So, yeah, I think it's...
Is it like focus? Was it just like...
Focused,
yeah.
It kind of shed some of the things that weren't that important. Like when you do that kind of deep dive check-in with yourself, the priorities line up, but it's also, I'm sure you know this as well as anybody, it's what you start to say no to. Yeah, it's the shedding as well.
It's I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand that level of focus, that what it's required to get to the level that you, Jimmy, have reached. Any regrets along the way for the focus that you've had, and the it's, to say that it's 10,000 hours would be about a 30,000 hour understatement to get to where you're at, or similar. Any regrets along the way? I think, I'm obsessed with this idea of the number one regret of the dying is that they didn't live their life in accordance with their own values, that they were, go back to, this is like a full circle moment here, go back to how we opened the show, which is like all these cultural pressures, what we should be and do and become. And, you should please your parents and your career counselor and your teachers and your grandma. But, you've debunked that. And so now I'm kind of checking in. Any regrets along the way, or, if so, what are they?
I would say that right now, especially during the quarantine, I have been very grateful on a number of levels, because I'm in a situation where I can work from home. I am in a situation where I can get out and get my wilderness therapy that I need but one of the things I'm most grateful for is the time that I've been spending with my family. And I've talked to a lot of parents, very successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, actors, all kinds of different people who are parents. And the number of times I've had them tell me because I'll ask the same question, like, do you have any regrets? Because that's what you want to know, right? And they're like, I regret not spending more time with my kids. And I've been on, like, particularly the last few years, but since my daughter was born, I've been on a pretty insane work travel schedule. This last 2 months is the most consecutive days I've spent with my kids ever, by quite a bit, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I get 3 to 5 days at a time here and there, but like, January and February this year, I didn't see them for 2 months. I was in Antarctica, went on a bunch of speaking gigs, and then onto another shoot in Patagonia. I literally didn't see my kids for 60 days. And there's 4 and 6. 60 days is a lot. They change a lot in that amount of time. So Um, I don't. I'd say I don't want to have that regret of not spending that time with my children. And this time with them has definitely really shown me how important it is for me to be with them day in and day out, even if I'm working during the day, but I see them in the evening, like that connection and what happens and how much it takes to kind of be a good parent, and like those daily little steps that are getting them, further along to progress as little mini humans. But so I'm aware of that regret, and it's something I don't want to have. But in terms of like the rest of my life, I feel like I'm happy with the choices I've made.
No, that's just an amazing perspective, and I think that that's like the visual that you painted, sort of in post escaping death avalanche, of just the priorities snapping into order, is like that is beautiful. And to see you now sort of fulfilling that in this time and being reminded of, I don't think, do you believe in balance, having a balanced life, or is it more harmonious? Like, what's the, given that you have to, it's probably not the last time you're going to go 60 days without seeing your kids, or maybe it is. Like, how do you get it?
Balance. I mean, it's kind of like skiing. You're never really quite in balance. You're always kind of recovering.
Yeah, always just a little. That's why I call it harmony and not balance, because I'm like, there's not one time where I'm balanced.
It's all
I think
about, you're constantly recovering.
it's right. It's not about error avoidance. It's error recovery.
Yeah, it's but no, I feel like as I'm getting a little older, yeah, I would say it was not very balanced just 2 months ago, like, but I've lived like that for 20 years, so it's kind of like you're just always rolling with it. Any freelancer is like that, right? Where you're like, okay, now it's time to really jam hard. And there's still so much I'd love to do out there. So it is often like a question I have is like, should you give up all of these things in order to spend more time with the kids? Or, but then you think about, well, what do you want your kids to aspire to from you, like being the dad? So that's kind of the lens I sent, because I'm like, well, I want them to do what made them happy, and that, like, what makes them feel whole, and you also, that's how you're the best version of yourself. Like, that's what you get to bring back to the kids. So it's a juggling act, for sure.
Harmony, not balance.
Yeah.
Last question, my man. I appreciate all the time today. I want to give a shout out to the global community, to Larry and Albert and Ford and Fergus and Sam Rast and Furza, and more than 100 other people currently commenting. Where do you go from here? You basically rang the bell, right? You did the thing that so many people want to do as a filmmaker. You did it as a photographer first and foremost, transitioned into a filmmaker, made a couple films, rang the bell on on your first major doco. Like, it's maybe second one, but where now?
In some ways, it takes a lot of pressure off, in the sense of there are still a ton of stories we want to tell, films we want to make, mountains I want to climb, lines I want to ski, breaks I want to surf, like, and the list keeps getting longer. So there's kind of no shortage for me of things that I still want to do. But like the fact that, like you said, I kind of rang the bell, when we talk about that external validation thing, like it's kind of taken like the pressure off. It's like now, like even more than before, I can just focus on the work, and I can just do the things that this. One of the nice things that you do get out of it is you have a little bit more control over choosing the things that you really want to do, and so I don't take that for granted. And so we're working on a couple films right now, and there's pretty much I want to keep doing what I'm doing.
Oh, that's beautiful, and I would welcome the opportunity to talk with Shai in front of the global community that listens to the show. You guys are an amazing pair. It was so fun to see you, watching and communicating with some friends. With CJ was there with you, and it was just really, really fun. Couldn't be more happy for you, man. It's just incredible, and thanks for helping put it on display. This idea of choosing to go live in your car, and having not just everything turn out okay, but creating a magical life that inspires so many. So shout out to you, and I know I'm representing hundreds of, if not more, of people who are commenting right now about the quality of the work you put out there, the quality of the values that you live by and share. It's just really inspirational, and so many folks want to give you a high five right now, so I'm doing it in their place. What's the best? Yeah, high five back. And of course, if you're if you haven't seen, if you're one of like the 8 people on the planet that hasn't seen Free Solo, you must. Any other place you want to direct people for more of your work?
I mean, I guess my Instagram at Jimmy Chin, and then my website, jimmychin.com. But probably the thing that I would shout out most is some of the organizations that I work with. National Outdoor Leadership School, incredible organization. Conservation Alliance, amazing. The Access Fund, and the American Alpine Club. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that have actually also been there for me throughout my career, and I want to support them. So.
Awesome. All right, folks, signing off. Yours truly with the one and only Mr. Jimmy Chin in the house. Thanks for coming at us live from Jackson Hole. Folks around the world, thanks for tuning in. If it's your first time here at Creative Live TV, welcome. We broadcast live shows here every single day from the homes and living rooms and kitchen counters of the world's top creators and entrepreneurs. Of course, we have more than 3,000 other classes at Creative Live, but you can see conversations like this and other impromptu things here during the COVID time at creativelive.com/TV. Jimmy, thanks for being on the show, bud. Appreciate you, and we'll catch up offline. We got a little bit more time. Thanks, man. Good to see you healthy and happy, and I'll follow up with you soon, my man.
Cool. Sounds good, Chase.
Thanks everybody.